Scotians, as many of you will know, was launched just yesterday on May 26th. It's an 87-page report that details what it would take to ensure that everyone had access to safe, permanently affordable, secure, supported, and adequate housing in Nova Scotia. No small feat, but also not as hard to accomplish as everyone makes it out to be. To produce the report, the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives Nova Scotia office convened the Housing for All Working Group. And this working group includes advocates and activists in housing, social and economic justice circles, academics, and providers of nonprofit housing, shelter, and community-based support services from across this province. Representatives from over 40 organizations across the province were represented here. And tonight we're going to hear from members of the Housing for All Working Group. And this incredible group of people worked diligently and tirelessly to produce this report that came to a consensus on 95 recommendations. Think about that for a second, 95 recommendations. Try ordering a pizza with 10 people and see how hard that is to pull off. This is no small feat, and the substance of a report of this caliber cannot be ignored by the government of Nova Scotia. There will be time for questions and discussion afterwards, and we ask that you input your questions using the chat function so that we can try and group questions together and really get as many voices out there as possible. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to our valiant leader, Dr. Christine Saulnier, Director of the Nova Scotia Office of the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, who is the co-lead on this work. Christine's going to give us an overview of the process, some of the key questions, and how we endeavored to answer them. And just before I hand it over to Christine, I also want to recognize Dr. Catherine Levitin-Reed, who's with us today, will not be speaking at this moment, but will be here to answer your questions. She is an associate professor, community economic development at Cape Breton University, and her research has focused on housing, community development, the social economy, and social care. And she's currently leading 2 research projects on affordable housing, one in partnership with the Cape Breton Community Housing Association, and the second with organizations and universities across the country. So now to you, Christine, please.
Thank you, Ajay, and thanks to everyone who is here this evening. What a fantastic turnout, including from my fellow working group members. Yeah, I'm just so thrilled that we've been able to launch this report together that we released yesterday. And I'm just going to go briefly over some of the key priorities in the report. So as Ajay said, it was a collaborative process. The Housing for All Working Group has worked for a couple of months now on this report. And at the end of all of the presentations, as people are exiting, we're gonna show all the names of the working group as if there are credits from the end of a movie. But you can see all the names of the individuals and organizations. They are listed in the second page of the full report. I think Lauren will put the report link in the chat for you if you haven't already had a look at it. So there is a briefer report. The brief report is 33 pages. It really is just has all of the recommendations in it with the short introduction. So first off, this work was guided by a very critical question. The question is, what would it take to ensure that everyone has meaningful access to safe, permanently affordable, we're going to underline permanently affordable, secure, supported, and adequate housing in Nova Scotia? And each of those words was chosen very intentionally together. To answer the question, this work was guided by, 2 things. First, by the idea that we really need to reframe how we think about housing. And we must ensure that we think about housing as a human right. And here before you, you have an excerpt from the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. And as it says before you, everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of himself and his family, including food, clothing, housing, medical care, and necessary social services. The second really critical underpinning of this report was that we drew on the 10 principles from the social policy framework for Nova Scotia. This is a framework that we developed, CCPA Nova Scotia, with the Nova Scotia College of Social Workers. And I see that lead author Tammy Finley, professor at Mount St. Vincent, is joining us this evening. So this report was underpinned by those 10 principles. And here is how those principles underpinned our work. Each chapter is guided by a principle, and that principle is underlying the goal of that chapter. So our very first chapter, which of course speaks to the overarching framework, is that we must treat housing as a human right, and we must ensure universal access. That is, affordable housing solutions must ensure that access is a right, not based on one's ability to purchase it in the market. And it is critical to ensure that there is no discrimination. The second principle underpinning the report is that we must ensure that we move away from the current approach to housing, which relies heavily on the market to meet housing needs, because time and again, we are witness to its failure. These Housing for All recommendations will result in 30,000 units of permanently affordable housing. This plan will also ensure that housing security is possible by funding adequate community-based support services based on need for supported and supportive housing in order to ensure that housing first is actually a reality. And so this report is about forefronting public provision and ensuring community control over housing. The third principle is that addressing the housing crisis is not just about the supply of housing. It is actually recognizing that in order to prevent homelessness and housing insecurity, we need upstream solutions across policy silos that address the root causes. Unless we do it that way, we will be constantly reacting, providing emergency solutions that are stopgap at best. So this report underlines the interconnectedness of the solutions. The fourth principle is indeed that we must ensure that housing solutions are not just affordable, that they are inclusive, that they address deeply rooted systemic barriers to tackle how race, gender, class, and ability compound exclusions related to housing and housing supports. The fifth principle is that we go a little deeper here, as Ajay talked about in the introduction. Housing solutions need to be grounded in reconciliation. They need to redress the legacies of colonialism, racism, and enslavement, and ensure that we really have a reckoning to address the historical and violent disposition of land and property by colonial governments and end colonial paternalism in housing solutions. The sixth principle is that we can do all of that, and indeed must do all of that, while also addressing climate justice. Incorporating climate justice means that we address the need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and consider the effect of climate change and environmental racism when we build our housing, ensuring that the disproportionate impact of proposed climate change policies, that the disproportionate impact of proposed climate change is addressed as we build good green housing. The seventh principle is that we ensure that those who build and those who maintain housing, as well as those who provide housing-related support services, they're all paid a living wage, and they're provided with decent benefits and supports for their well-being and that of the community. The eighth principle is that in order to address the housing and homelessness crisis, we must involve more open decision-making and processes that are safe, that safeguard non-market housing from the influence of corporations and business interests, and really allow stakeholders and tenants, those people who are living in this housing, to be engaged and to have real meaningful decision-making power. The ninth principle is about accountability and governance. Affordable housing solutions must be part of a plan that has clear lines of accountability. We all know that's been one of the problems with housing. We need strong targets and timelines for measuring progress. And in this report, we are calling on the provincial government to show some significant leadership and investment. And the 10th principle is that we can do this. We can, in fact, have high quality, green, affordable, and accessible non-market housing responding to the need in the community, while also transforming our taxing and spending and getting at one of the root causes of the housing crisis, or a couple of them, and that is income and wealth inequality. So we do have a full fiscal framework. We have costed this report to come out to about $531 million over 10 years in terms of capital investment, housing infrastructure, and another $161 million in operating on average per year over 10 years. Our fiscal framework, just even in the tax measures that we were able to cost, would raise $515 million a year. So that the provincial government, should it not want to listen to what we've also said, which is that they can definitely be borrowing and investing in this kind of infrastructure and that they need to, we have provided them with some taxing options. And I am going to, I think, just say a couple of things. 95 recommendations, because we recognize again that we need not only to build the housing that's required. Our report would build over 30,000, but we need to do things like address the low levels of income assistance, provide additional income supports, increase minimum wage, so reduce poverty. And we need to do so much more that supports people in our community so that everyone has a place to call home in our community, is included in the ways that they want to be in a community of their choosing. Worth every dollar. Over to you, Ajay.
Thank you very much for that, Christine. Money well spent, absolutely. And a lot of work clearly went into costing that, which is also amazing. There really is no excuse for not taking these reports seriously. So next, we're going to move to the part of our program where we call on members of the working group to unmute yourselves, turn on your cameras if you desire, and give us about, a 2-minute kind of take on introducing yourself or your organization and why this report was important for you to be a part of. So in the chat, we are, just so that for your own preparation, you can see the order that I'll be calling on people. This is based on people who had registered ahead of time. So this is the list that we'll be working through. I will somewhat rudely interrupt at around the 2-minute mark, just to say that you're at time so that you should wrap up. Apologies for this, but with so many people, this is the only way we can do that in a fair way. So I would like to call first on Sherry Lecker to say a few words, please.
Okay, well, thank you and hello to everyone tonight. I'm not going to take my 2 full minutes. Someone else can borrow it. I just really want to congratulate everyone who has taken part and contributed. Really brilliant leadership, once again, from Christine and Catherine. Housing for all is important to all of us. The organization with whom I work and the people I work alongside, I would like to think that we try to bring these principles to life every day in our work, in the provision of shelter and long-term housing, permanent, safe, affordable, soon to be green, accessible or more accessible than we're required. We have a new project underway. We're currently constructing. Some folks on this call would know that. We're building 25 units for 55 to 60 people. And I don't think it's a surprise to say it is tough work. If I think about trying to create that for 25 to 30,000 more Nova Scotian households, we need everyone on this call. We need everyone in this province. And again, I congratulate everyone for the work, and we will commit to trying to continue to bring the recommendations to life every day in our interactions with everyone and in the work that we do. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Sherry. Next on our list, we have Linda Wilson, please.
Good evening. I'm Linda Wilson. I'm with Shelter Nova Scotia. I would echo every single word Sherry just said. Congratulations to everybody who is involved. We are so proud to be involved with this effort. It's the report is just excellent and accurate, and we will do everything possible to make sure as many people as we know can see it and understand it and discuss it, and we will bring the principles and continue to bring the principles into the work we do. And I would just say thank you for allowing us to be involved, and congratulations again. I'm very, very proud to have my name and Shelter Nova Scotia's name included on the long list of advocates and organizations. It's just excellent. Thank you.
I think I'm next. Hi, everybody. My name is Mel Stirk. I go she, her, and I work with Phoenix Youth Programs. We were also really pleased with the outcomes of this report. It was amazing to have a piece, a little bit of work, say in this wonderful piece of work that Christine and team put together. We at Phoenix, working with youth for housing and shelter, ages 16 to 24, see the struggle. It's very real, and we know it's not just with the youth that we're working with. And it's become harder and harder to find housing supports for youth that are all of those things that were in the question that originated this conversation. We believe too in supporting the whole person. So the social policy framework with the 10 principles really resonates for us, and making sure that people are housed for the long term and are supported fully as full individuals. And we feel that the recommendations from this report are incredibly strong and would really change things in this province for everyone and the youth that we work with. So thank you all for being here tonight. It's so nice to see such a great turnout. And again, very proud to be part of this report. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mel. Next on the list is Alex Stratford, please.
Again, so proud of this work, and amazing how so many folks came together to contribute to it. At the end of the day, what this report really tells us is that we can have an impact and make a substantial difference in the lives of people. We live in a province that continues to hold a narrative of scarcity, that we can't do things, that we cannot provide for folks, that folks are on their own. And consistently, what the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives does is in fact show us the exact opposite, that there's an abundance of wealth, there's an abundance of opportunity, there's an abundance of ideas that we can create to put forward to create a meaningful society and a better environment for folks to thrive in. As a social worker and as the executive director for the College of Social Workers, I can say that our members on a daily basis encounter the issue of housing as being primary to many of the issues they face, whether it be in child protection, where again, the majority of families involved are involved because of issues of housing. Similar within mental health, we know the significant impact that inadequate housing has on a person's mental health. So again, what this report tells us and what this report guides us to do is to rethink how we construct our public policy and our public programs. And in fact, that when we work together, as this report has demonstrated, and in fact, when we collectively respond, that we can have a substantial impact and substantially improve the lives of Nova Scotians. And I think that that is what I'm so proud of about this report, is that it is undeniable in the intent as well as the process and the outcomes and the recommendations that these policy solutions will work, that these policy solutions will lead to a better quality of life for Nova Scotians. So again, incredibly thankful for everyone who turned out tonight. The step now for everyone involved on this call tonight is to take this report push it into the public narrative, hold people accountable, and don't let them tell you that it can't be done, because it can. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alec. Yeah. Next on our list is Sydney Bloom, please.
Hi, everyone. I actually might pass this along to Hannah Wood, who's our elected chair here tonight, and might be able to give a better speech than I.
Sure.
Hi, so I am the chair of the Halifax Peninsula chapter of ACORN, and ACORN, for anyone who isn't familiar, it's the largest tenants union in Nova Scotia and a community organization of working class people. We are really proud of the small contribution we had to this report. I was personally really impressed with, just as Christine was saying in the beginning, how there's an interconnected locking types of solutions happening here that rely upon each other. It's not just trying to oversimplify what is a very complex issue. One of the big issues we saw with the government's housing commission is it deals with too narrow of a scope, and it had far too much representation from developers and landlords and not from community groups. So the composition of this group is something that we were really pleased with. So now that we have these great recommendations, we just need to take the steps now to fight to make this a reality and put boots on the ground and make sure that the government feels the pressure to apply these recommendations. So that's where we see our role now, and are really, really pleased with what's come out of this. Thank you for everyone involved.
Could I just say one thing I forgot to say, which is so many amazing organizations have been involved, and I would love it if you would share in the chat your website, ways to get in touch with you, ways to support your work, because I think that is really important. So if you feel like you want to do that, I would love it if you did that. Put some things in the chat and let people know. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Hannah and Acorn and everyone else so far. We're next going to hear from Colleen Cameron, please.
All right. Good evening, everyone. I have to echo what everyone else said. It's been a real honor and a privilege and a pleasure to be part of this working group. I was amazed at how much was accomplished in such a short time, and how everyone came together in consensus, and hats off to Christine and Catherine taking the lead on this. But everyone contributed so much to bring forth this very comprehensive, interconnected document that, you know, as Alex said, we're proud of. And it just speaks to all the different aspects of the issues around affordable housing. And you have to look at everything, the colonialism, the interconnectedness, all of that. It has to all be looked at. And it has that human rights, social justice approach. So that's why I'm so pleased and proud to be part of this. I'm on this group representing the Antigonish Poverty Reduction Coalition. And housing has been a big part of this coalition for years. I think some of the things that I was able to bring to this discussion was the rural perspective, not the only one, but others as well, you know, to dispel the myth that housing and homelessness is an urban issue, which it is, that is a myth and has some negative consequences as a result of that thinking. So this, as I said, report is very, very comprehensive. I just want to say I'm also the chair of the Antigonish Affordable Housing Society. So I have experience in working with funders to provide affordable housing. And I can agree with, I forget now who it was that I was looking around here, working on affordable housing. We're building 12 units now, and it has been a long, long, arduous, time-consuming task to get that $3 million to do this work. We had tried for 15 units and we couldn't get it. So part of this is, I'm hoping, is going to change some of the system that we're in that is preventing us from doing this work that the government should be doing. So I will stop there before I go on a rant about that. But thank you, everyone. And I look forward to continue this work with you.
Thank you very much, Colleen. Next on our list is Mark Culligan, please.
Good evening. I'm Mark Culligan, and I'm a community legal worker with the Dalhousie Legal Aid Service. In my day job, I represent tenants in legal disputes with landlords and coordinate a legal information line that provides information to about 500 to 600 tenants per year. And when I'm fielding those calls with tenants, many of whom are in desperate situations, what I'm hearing from them are stories of illegal evictions. I'm hearing stories of discrimination when tenants are applying to live in housing. And I'm hearing stories of landlords running roughshod over the law by not respecting rules around application fees and security deposits and not bothering to do the repairs that they're legally supposed to do. And it makes me extremely upset because often I have to tell them that the law is not strong enough. The tenant protections aren't strong enough. And even though they have rights, it may be a long road with an inadequate outcome. And that's why I'm extremely happy to be working with the CCPA and all the other contributors to this report, because the authors of this report assumed from the beginning that it would be a mistake to assume that the housing crisis can be solved through the private market alone. This is not just a problem of inadequate supply of rental units. It's a problem of a legal system and a political culture that has abandoned tenants all across Nova Scotia. And the holistic and comprehensive approach to this report is a very powerful alternative to what the government-appointed commission will release. And I'm extremely happy that this report includes demands for stronger laws to protect tenants and a call for the government to put our money where our mouth is when it comes to fighting discrimination, and a call to boost wages and benefits to low-income people so that low-income people aren't hived off into a corner of the housing market. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Mark. And just a quick appreciation to everybody. You are the most disciplined group of short speakers that I have ever encountered. So next on our list is Brian Gifford, please.
Yes, hello. I'm with the Affordable Energy Coalition, and I'd like to echo what everyone else has been saying. Thank Christine and CCPA for pulling this together, and appreciate working with all the people involved. It really was a wonderful experience, very inspiring experience. I'm talking about the climate change section, and the text outlines some of the threats faced from past actions and future forecasts of future changes. So there's, it's called climate change, but this section also deals with other environmental issues. So there's 6 recommendations, and they fit into 3 types. The first 2 are about environmental racism, based on the work by Dr. Ingrid Waldron and others. And the recommendations aim to prevent further environmental racism and to research and address past toxic effects of environmental racism from housing being located too close to toxic sites and that kind of thing. 3 of the recommendations are about energy efficiency. Energy will be cheaper and healthier, and homes will be healthier after the transition to climate-friendly policies and systems. Well-insulated homes that use highly efficient heat pumps are both cheaper to operate, and also so they're more affordable. They contribute to the affordability of homes by making them cheaper on an annual, in terms of what you have to pay to keep them going. And they're also more comfortable and healthier. But low-income households can't afford to make the transition. So the recommendations here are for substantial government investment to help low-income households with the transition. There are already a couple of very good programs in Nova Scotia. In fact, there's several good programs, and they're described in the document. The home warming program and the affordable multifamily housing program are 2 of the big examples, but there's also a very good one with First Nations, and there's others as well. So we have to expand those so that we can insulate all of the existing homes and make sure that future homes that are built are very low energy use, using a passive house standard. The fifth one other recommendation is for a universal service program. This is something that the Affordable Energy Coalition has been advocating for many, many years. And what that would do is the energy costs of low income 6% of the income. So this is something we think is essential for affordable housing. The cost of such would be written over. It's something that should be started right.
All right, thank you, Brian. We kind of lost a little bit of that tail end there, but I particularly appreciated that chapter. So thank you for your work. Next on the list, we're going to go to Bernadette Hamilton Reed, please.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm Bernadette Hamilton Reed. I pay homage to my African ancestries from the motherland, hail from the communities of Beachville, North Preston, Cherry Brook and Lake Loon. So we are glad to be here representing the African Nova Scotian voice and people of African ancestry. It has indeed been a pleasure, an eye-opener, and unbelievable experience being on this committee talking about Nova Scotia housing. So as everyone has said, ditto to everything that has been said. To Christine and Catherine, thank you for your leadership. And these recommendations, we need to make sure that they get followed through, and the accountability is there for government. So I think the people around the table and those that are here today will certainly agree that we need to stay steadfast on this and be vigilant in making sure that we make these actions happen, because it's long overdue. So for African Nova Scotian people, as you know, there's been so much. There are 52 historical African Nova Scotian communities in Nova Scotia. And when we came to this land through enslavement, we owned our lands, we owned our homes, but many of that has been taken away from us through gentrification and developers coming in and handing out money that people think is a win-win, but it's they're stealing the land from the people. So we need to stop that. And the report talks about developers coming in and taking over land also, and especially in high risk areas where people don't really understand what's going on. So we need to be aware of all that's going on. So the developers coming in, the gentrification that takes place, just the amount of knowledge. And it was amazing to find out how many people and organizations are actually working on affordable housing, and there's still a need for it. So it just shows that the need is there strongly. The office that I'm with, the African Nova Scotian Decade for People of African Descent Coalition, our mandate is to support African Nova Scotians in all issues that they have. We're most known right now for street checks, which was really vulnerable in our communities. And housing is another big one. We get calls all the time. And as we know now with the market, with real estate, there are people that have been displaced out of their homes because landlords are now finding the people from Ontario. Sorry if you're from Ontario, but I have family there too, are buying up homes, and they're leaving people homeless because they're getting more money for their homes than when people were in those homes. So we also need to be aware of that. And it's not always about public housing that people want to go into. People want to be able to have a home and a yard for their children to grow up in, and they deserve that as well as the next person. So it's not always about putting them in housing units and putting them in segregated areas. They should be able to go into mainstream. They should be able to live in a community that is diverse, has equity, inclusion, and diversity in it, and we are felt welcome. So this group of people that worked around the table, so many voices, so many thoughts about what can happen, and it's only going to be positive. And if we help one group of people, we know that we're helping many. So thank you for your time, and I look forward to the rest of the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Bernadette. Next on our list is Jeff Carabano, please.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jeff Carabano. I'm a Prophet DAL, also one of the directors of the DAL Social Work Community Clinic, and with a lot of folks actually around this table now, part of the Out of the Cold Emergency Winter Shelter community as well. And first of all, it's an honor to be part of this group. Second of all, it's lovely to see so many colleagues and friends doing this work. This is such an important piece of thinking. Deeply compassionate, very, very caring, progressive, important, and extremely timely. I'm just finishing up a study looking at COVID and homelessness. And as we all know, homelessness and housing issues have been a disaster way before COVID, but COVID has really, really amplified these conditions. And I think it is so significant and urgent right now that we push these principles. This is a very thoughtful, eloquent roadmap to not leaving anybody behind. And I think we really, as Alec noted earlier, now we need to be very strategic in pushing these findings, these thinkings in a lot of different government circles. We have a lot of allies in government. We need to be working with them to get this very robust and comprehensive plan to fruition. So again, it's an honor to be part of this all, and thank you for including me.
Thank you so much for that, Jeff. Next on our list is Jennifer Powley, please.
All right, so my name's Abby. I'm Jen's assistant. I'm going to be reading her little speech today. I am Jen Powley. I have a severe physical disability. The amount I get from Canada Pension is $827.27. I cannot get an apartment at market rate for that amount. We need to address that with government. I worked when I could, but the reality is that a lot of people can't. That doesn't mean they are less deserving of somewhere adequate to live. The Housing for All Working Group recognizes that and wants to provide real solutions with that in mind. I hope that government takes this report seriously. A lot of work and thought went into it. And that is all. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that, Jennifer. Next on our list is Stella Lord, please.
Hi, everybody. I coordinate a group called the Community Society to End Poverty, and really what we focus on is advocating for real income assistance transformation that some of you know has been supposedly going on with our province for the last 5 years. There have been some changes, but absolutely not enough. Many people on income assistance are really housing challenged, and in the last 2 years, we've been more involved in the housing market rental issue in terms of the whole rent eviction issue. People were being evicted from their rental housing, rents were going up. The people I work with are mostly advocates at the community level who, are the first people that the people who are in this situation try to turn to, although there are not enough of these people on the ground, I have to say. And it's been such a challenge for people on income assistance, as well as those people who are trying to advocate and help them navigate the system, as well as try and locate housing subsidies or rents that are not extortionate. So it has been a real challenge. And I was so glad when CCPA decided that they were going to focus on this issue and this report. And it's been a real privilege to meet everybody on this in the working group and work with you on this, because it's been, the result is great. I mean, it's a holistic, intersectional approach and a holistic approach. And don't we wish the government would work like this in public policy? I mean, my goodness, such an example for the government to take. And I'm certainly hopeful that it's going to have some effect. We do have a lot of work to do, I think, all of us. now this report is circulating, I think we will all have still a lot of work to do to make sure this report gets implemented over the next few months, at least, and taken seriously. So just to say thanks everybody who's worked on this far more than I did. I'm afraid I had a little bit of a contribution, but on the income side really, and that's such an important piece because, as many of you know, people on income assistance are about 50% below the market basket measure of poverty, which isn't a great measure of poverty anyway. So people on income assistance are so vulnerable to what's been happening in the housing market in the last 2 years especially. So thanks to everybody.
Thank you, Stella, for that. Imagine if a government worked for all of us. The next on my list here is Trish McCourt, please. Trish. Are you with us, Trish? Maybe we'll come back to Trish. Next is Sherry Taylor then.
Hi there. So Sherry Taylor here with Leaside Society, a domestic violence shelter, women's shelter in Port Hawkesbury and Strait Area Women's Place. And I really want to reiterate what's already been said in the sense that I feel really humbled and honored to have had the opportunity to participate with this group of change makers and social advocates across the province of Nova Scotia. My contribution was very minimal. However, I just really had the opportunity to listen and learn a lot, and I'm very appreciative of that. I'm really impressed with the holistic approach that was taken with the report, the social inclusion piece, including all, so seniors, newcomers, people with disabilities, women fleeing domestic violence, and looking at, you know, the complexity around the intersectionalities that all of these groups face when it comes to affordable housing issues, particularly in rural areas, as was mentioned by one of my colleagues from Antigonish and the affordable housing piece. I'm really excited to see the green energy builds with appropriate community services attached to that, and for us to advocate as a group for fair wages across nonprofit worlds, because there's a lot of people that are at the grassroots levels here on this call that are doing fabulous work. And unfortunately, they're not being compensated at the level that they really should be. So thank you all for allowing me to participate. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for that, Sherry. And next on our list, we have Fiona Traynor, please.
I believe Fiona's here, and I'm the only representative from Dow Legal Aid. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next we'll have Sarah Trower.
Hi, everyone. And yeah, appreciate everything that everyone said and really appreciate all the folks that put so much hard work into this. So thank you so much. I sat on this committee on behalf of the Canadian Federation of Students Nova Scotia. So we fight for free and accessible post-secondary education for everyone. And we know that housing is a huge cost for students, but I'm actually going to pass it off to our elected rep, Chris Repas, who is going to speak a little bit more to that. Thanks so much, everyone.
Sweet. Thank you, Sarah. Hi, everyone. My name is Chris, he, him pronouns, and I'm the chairperson for CFS&S. For those of you who don't know, the Canadian Federation of Students is the oldest and largest national student organization in Canada, and we represent over 500,000 undergrad, grad, and college students across the country. We fight for free, accessible, high quality post-secondary education for all, and we are the progressive voice when it comes to student issues. Currently, Nova Scotia domestic students have the highest fees in the country, and international students, of course, are paying several times higher than our domestic students. As we all know, housing is a huge financial burden for students who are already struggling to afford their education. And we know that the most marginalized students are often those in the most precarious and unsafe housing situations. This includes students of color, international students, students with disabilities, and student parents. This new report is important to us. It helps us work towards meeting intermediate and fundamental needs of students and all Nova Scotians. And it also really helps us with the most up-to-date research when it comes to affordable and accessible housing in Nova Scotia. So I really want to thank you all for your commitment, your hard work, and your knowledge when it comes to this work. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much for that. And our next speaker is Tom Urbaniak.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. I'm Tom Urbaniak. I'm a political science professor at Cape Breton University, one of Catherine's colleagues. And I also work with and alongside a number of volunteer and nonprofit organizations in our region interested in working on housing. My role was small. I came in midway and looking mainly at issues of accountability. I'm just really humbled to be sort of listed as part of this incredible group, Frontline and First Voice, people with brought some of their empirical skills into it. I just made a list of a few adjectives or words that I think really describe the essence of this landmark project. It's equitable, it's just, it's grassroots, it's practical, it's clear, it's accountable and democratic. It's focused on the whole person, as has been mentioned. It's economically sound. It's achievable, and we can start right away. And just on that note, I really think, and I may be very hopeful here, but that there is a little bit of a window of opportunity, actually a big window of opportunity. There are generational shifts happening post-pandemic. Setting the agenda for some of the initial stimulus policies is a real opportunity for us. And as soon as the embargo was lifted, I've been sharing the report with colleagues and folks with whom I volunteer and policymakers, and I'll continue to do that. And I might just humbly emphasize the urgency of the moment, and gratitude to the wonderful leaders, Christine and Catherine, and this team. It's really an honor to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Tom. Next on our list, we have Chris Parsons. Are you with us tonight, Chris? Okay, we can come back to Chris if he is here. And last on this list is Judy Haven, please. Judy, are you with us tonight? Okay, not hearing anything from Judy. I'm just going to go back one more time to Trish McCourt in case Trish is here. All right. Are there any members of the audience who were part of the working group that maybe didn't register before we took down the names that would like to say a few words? I want to make sure everybody who worked on this report gets a chance to speak. So please, please do either put your hand up or unmute if you are a member of the group that produced the report that would like to say a few words. All right, then. Fantastic. So we are now moving into the next part of our program, which is going to be discussion and engagement with the group. So anyone in the audience, I see that we've had a very active chat, which is wonderful. A lot of it, let's see, there's some lengthy comments here that aren't necessarily questions. So I'll just take a quick peek. I see from Midge, Lane, I'm a psychotherapist in the Annapolis Valley. I meet clients whose families contend with homelessness. Some of the clients I see wouldn't need psychotherapy if they had secure housing and food security. I worry about the time it would take to build the new housing that's needed. So I wonder about how possible it might be to use quicker practical solutions like suitably built shipping containers, as was done in Vancouver. Christine or Catherine, would you like to speak to that?
I can start. So I think so that's a great question. And I think it's just important to emphasize that We did talk about construction and acquisitions in the report. So that might be a solution in your area, a faster response than building new housing. So for example, where I live in Cape Breton Regional Municipality, we recently had 2 purpose-built apartment buildings on the market. And so that's an example of how government can step in and actually purchase that housing first. And so there's probably a need to do some renovating to that housing, but still that's a very quick response compared to new builds. And as far as your suggestion around shipping containers, absolutely, I think that's a possibility. I think what's important to keep in mind, and I know everyone on this call knows this, is that the kind of housing that the individuals that you're talking about are interested in living in? Does that foster social inclusion? So again, just thinking about the local context that I'm in, you know, we considered tiny homes for some of the people experiencing homelessness here in CBRM, but we felt that it was really, in the end, it was a stigmatizing, you know, it didn't really meet the housing first principle of normal housing, quote unquote, normal housing. And so we decided not to go down that road.
Thank you. Christine, did you want to add anything to that? Or shall we move to the next question? Okay, so via email, we have received a question from Elaine that is, if you were attending an all candidates election discussion, which perhaps many of us will be in the not too distant future, what question on affordable housing would you pose? I think it's a really important question of strategy here. Christine, should we go to you first for that one?
No? I think it's the question we asked.
Yeah.
Right.
The first one, eh?
Yeah. What would your party do to ensure that everyone in Nova Scotia has access to secure, affordable, quality, all of the adjectives that we used? I think that's the question. I mean, there may be very different questions depending on what community you are in. So Colleen certainly has outlined some of them, and Catherine, you know, obviously the context matters, but I think that's the main question. Who is going to step up and actually take leadership and acquire, build, invest, and do what we've asked, which is the key question.
Thank you. Catherine, did you want to add anything to that? No? Okay. And also, if there are members from the working group who do want to weigh in on a particular question, please feel free to do so. I'm just mostly going to Christine and Catherine for simplicity. So I see, Colleen, you have your hand up. Did you want to respond to that question?
Yeah, just quickly, my concern, I would say, our politicians, do they believe housing for all is a human right? And if they ascribe to that, if that is their value, then all of the policies will follow suit. So the national housing strategy, I could go on ad nauseum about that and how we have access to it, which is a huge issue. But all of these other aspects to housing, you know, the income and the stigmatization and all of that, if you really believe housing is a human right for all, I think then that would be the basis of change. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Alec, did you want to speak to that, please?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that you know, we've had 30 years now, maybe probably longer than that, of politicians who have been dominantly embedded in the idea that free market solutions are going to lead to the type of change that we want to see. In housing, and the paper clearly points out that that is a strategy that has failed and will continue to fail. So the question I think that all political candidates should be held to is, do you have the political courage to change that stance and to change that discourse? Government has to be an active part, a contributor, and take the lead here. It cannot rely on the market to fill this need. And I think that that's where we need to hold political candidates and those running to account. Is if you're just going to default to the developers, we are going to fail again. And I suspect many of us who contributed to this body of work suspect that when we see the Housing Commission's report, which comes out next week, that is going to be what they are pointing to, that the free market will provide the solutions here. And that is a false narrative, one that we have 30 years of data to show that it's not going to lead us there. So I think that is fundamentally, again, what we need to be holding our political candidates to.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Alec. The next question I have is from Stella, and it is, apart from the great coverage the report has received in the media, what are the plans to ensure that the report doesn't sit on the shelf? So kind of communications and strategy here. I'll give perhaps first word to either Catherine or Christine before we open it up.
So we did talk about seeking endorsements now that the report is out. Obviously, those who have been on the working group will use it and do what they can to push it out to their supporters and people that they know, people in their network. So that was one idea that was put on the table, was maybe we need to seek more endorsements and prove that this really is the framework by which Nova Scotians want to see our government move forward on. So that was one idea. I mean, we will send it to all the MLAs and have sent it to all the MLAs. We're looking for people to send it to their counselors. We can't so easily find counselors in every community, but we will send it out to HRM for sure, and CBRM and some of the big ones, but please send them directly to your politicians. We are offering to meet with anybody who wants to meet with us to talk about the report. And we hope that you will take ownership. Those of you, I was struck by how many people from the working group who said they had a small contribution. Here's a learning from this work is all of your small contributions added up to this incredibly significant report. And that's something that we really need to think about, right? That kind of solidarity work, when we do it together, feels like you have a small contribution. And here we are. Yeah, some of us did a bit more writing than others, but so many of you contributed big sections of the report and still are saying you only contributed a little bit. So I thank you all for what you contributed. And it is really, I want people to take ownership of it. This is CCPA has published it, but we never want our research to sit on a shelf. We do what we can, but we need you. We need you to get the word out there. And so if endorsement is something that we can do and other ideas, please share your ideas because that's what we need. We need to figure this out together.
Such an excellent point. And it really, I have to confess, as a person who read this report today in preparation for this evening, I was completely struck by how many people were involved and how coherent and how iterative of kind of reinforcing. It almost seemed like you were all weaving a basket together, that the solutions are so transparent when you read the whole report together. So I think thinking strategically about forcing people to read this whole report and not just pick a piece apart is going to be really important strategy for all of us moving forward. Colleen, did you want to speak to this question as well?
Just quickly, I want to suggest that every candidate in the upcoming election could be asked if they've read the report and what they think of the report. We could do that all across the province. And I think we should make sure our members of parliament, if we have a federal election, because their role plays a big part in this as well. But we have an opportunity coming up to get this out quite easily, I think. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for that. And I'm thinking with the amount of people here, we see like about 100 people here, 100 letters to the editor on the same subject can't be ignored. So there's something to be said about the low-hanging fruit as well. The next question I have in queue is from Ray Burke, and he asks, have the components of the 30,000 units been articulated, i.e. renovated or new apartments, condos, homes, etc.?
No, we didn't do that. I think it's difficult to know, how many purpose-built apartment buildings are going to be on the market in HRM and CBRM, how many duplexes are going to be on the market in smaller communities, because that's what our rental housing often looks like in smaller communities. And I just also want to note that we really are emphasizing rental housing and not other kinds of housing in this report.
Thank you. Christine, anything on that?
Well, just in terms of the costing. So of course we did cost it, but we costed it. So we used the CMHC, Canada Mortgage and Housing information about who is currently in core housing needs. So who is spending more than 30% or more on their shelter, and we looked at the demographics of that in terms of their needs. So 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, as much as we could. And we did use that as a base to construct new housing as a base for costing the report, but obviously we don't know how that would roll out and if it's possible to do some of the things that we outlined, which was, for the government to acquire rentals as they come on to the market, then that might change a bit in terms of the costing framework. But that's how we got to that piece, just so you know. And then the other part of that costing, which was critical, is the housing support piece. We're not just talking about affordable housing, we are talking about a housing first approach, and we're talking about supported as well as supportive housing. So we absolutely included costing for that. So depending on how many people, again, trying to figure out people with disabilities, seniors, where are we at, what can we do to support the services that are required from those who need 24/7.
Okay.
Yeah, that kind of thing.
Great. Thank you for that. So the next question we have here in queue comes from Joan, who asks, is the leaning toward ensuring all housing is integrated in that people would be paying rent based on their income, i.e. 30% of incomes, but not all in the same building in the same location? Joan, if you're here, if you want to just, I'm not sure I'm clearly articulating the question there. I believe the question is about,
I am here.
Yeah.
It's just, I'm just so conscious of public housing and that people are all in the same location. And someone made reference to not doing that, but I wanted to know if overall, is that how people are thinking, that if an apartment building, became available that was purposeful, could we have, some seniors and some families who could pay the full rent, and some individuals who really need to only be paying 30%, not market value, just an integrated. Because I find people are happier in that. I live in a building that's like that. I don't know who's subsidized by the company or who's subsidized by community services, but I know they're not paying the same rent I am.
Right. Thank you for that clarification. Christine or Catherine?
I was hoping Catherine would answer that one. I see, I'll let Catherine answer that one. I do see a question about cooperative housing. And yes, so our report is about we call it non-market. So non-market includes public social housing as well as nonprofit housing. And we specifically have a whole section of the report that talks about cooperative housing. That's, of course, the long history of cooperatives in Nova Scotia, and we need to build on that and support intergenerational cooperative housing and those kinds of things. So we are definitely hoping that those are the kinds of models. And because our principle is not just public provision, so definitely funded by government out of general revenue and non-market. However, we are very aware that community needs more control and input. So, along with, I will let Catherine talk about the mixed income issue, but one of the things we wanted to underline was many of the changes that we recommended around tenant rights, around ensuring that tenants have a say and more not so vulnerable to the whims of landlords is, of course, the model of housing, so cooperative housing in particular, but that we strengthen, as Mark, I think, pointed out initially. We have recommended a whole enforcement and compliance unit be developed and funded under the provincial government that's provincial across the province, that doesn't require tenants to make complaints, that's proactive, that ensures that people have quality housing, that repairs are taken care of. We have lots of, I think one of the things we should do is actually have a whole thing where people share their favorite recommendation. I have many favorites, but I think, you know, it is a package deal that we're trying to really push the idea that in many ways, renters are second-class citizens, and we need to really shift that so that people have more control and more say in where they're living and how they're living and the choices that affect their lives fundamentally. But Catherine, you want to add?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, I didn't jump in there right away. I was just jotting down the question because I have different things to say about that. So it's a really good question, and I think, to be perfectly honest, we maybe didn't address kind of neighborhood level issues and, you know, scattered site housing versus, you know, more congregate housing, maybe as well as we should have in the report. But I think, Christine, you're smiling. You know, anyway, but I mean, it's addressed and it's not addressed. And so this is how it's addressed, I think. So I think we emphasize that it's really important for different target groups of renters to be able to have input into the kind of housing that they want to live in. So, you know, one example that we give is at-risk youth. And so there is some literature that suggests that those at-risk youth feel comfortable, you know, living with other at-risk youth and supports as well. You know, with seniors, there's kind of a mixed reaction based on, you know, the literature on seniors' preferences around affordable housing. So some seniors prefer to live in seniors only housing, which, you know, I'm surprised when I read that, and some don't. So I really think that it's tenant engagement and working at the local level to determine how people want to live. As far as you know, integration, we also address access to amenities and services. So, you know, thinking about our bigger communities where services are concentrated. So to some degree, Sydney, you know, Halifax, we need to be building affordable housing in locations where people have easy access to amenities and services. We can't be talking about, you know, land that's available at lower cost, you know, on the outskirts of the municipality. That's harder to do in rural areas, but there we need to be talking about partnerships with service providers. I think, and I guess the last piece that I think will get at that issue of integration is this, you know, the section that we wrote on democratizing housing. You know, it's really striking how currently our tenants just don't have really a say at all in the housing in which they're living, except in cooperatives and sometimes nonprofit housing. So if you look at tenant involvement in public housing right now, tenants aren't elected to the quote unquote boards. They're appointed. You know, they don't have different mechanisms for involvement in buildings in their neighborhoods and at the level of the housing authority. So we're asking for deep tenant engagement. And I think through that tenant engagement, you would have the development of neighborhood level services to address, you know, the deep poverty that we're seeing in some of these communities right now.
Thanks for that. And I do want to draw everyone's attention to the chat window itself. There's a lot of good conversation and idea sharing going on in there. So please do be sure to have a good read of that. The next question comes from Sarah, and it asks, do the recommendations include technological solutions? For example, 3D printed houses are an emerging technology that claims to be able to reduce costs. That just sort of blows my mind as somebody who knows very little about this.
I I saw it recently on TikTok, but it isn't in our report. We haven't looked at that level of detail around what could be possible. Obviously, we need all of the solutions possible given the demand that exists in the province, but it's not something we specifically tackled. But I did just see a video. It's phenomenal. Can I know that, sorry, Ajay, way up, and you may have missed it. There was a question from Ian Johnson. I know you're still on here, and I know Olga mentioned cooperative housing. Thank you for that. Ian, you asked about pension funds, and I am intrigued because I think you're talking about it in a positive way versus a negative way. Can you explain? Because it isn't in our report, and I'm not sure, but I want to hear.
And apologies, Ian, I did miss that question.
No, sorry, no worries. Yeah, it's Ian Johnson, retired, but once was on the Public Service Superannuation Pension Board, and I was thinking, and I'm sorry, I haven't really I haven't read your report thoroughly, and I haven't thought much about it, but I was thinking this could be an area maybe where public service pension plans could contribute and support the many directions that you want to look at. And as I said, I'd like to really look at where pension boards and public service in particular could be supportive to your efforts to help move it forward. And they could set aside funds every year, or they could set up other vehicles whereby they could contribute to the various initiatives that you're talking about. And I think, and I'm sorry, I haven't really thought about it, and I'm not on the board anymore, but I'd like to just throw it out there as a thought, and certainly be willing to help move it along if I could. So I really appreciate, again, all the work that's been done. It's just been mind-blowing, and I hope maybe what I just proposed might be useful at some point in the future. Thank you very much.
Christine, go ahead, please.
No, thanks, Ian.
That's a great, yeah, it's a great idea. That's a great idea. Brian, I see your hand. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just wanted to respond to the question about technical innovation. The sixth recommendation under change is to fund the development of an ability to manufacture retrofits, deep energy retrofits, so that they can be applied to houses very quickly. This is something that's pioneered in Europe with one of the systems is called Energy Sprong, which you can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So yeah, the idea is to fund that so that you can pre-manufacture sheathing to put onto housing that's got the insulation already in it, and then the changed windows and all that sort of thing, so that you can install everything within a week on a building, rather than taking months and months and having to displace the people living there. So that is one form of technical innovation which is recommended.
That's great, thank you. So next on the list of questions here is a question from Karen and Richard asking about short-term housing, including Airbnb, and the oversight that might be needed for that industry.
Absolutely. In our report, we request that short-term rental housing be only possible only in owner-occupied dwellings. And we also recognize, because I saw a comment earlier on, there's someone from Shetty Camp on the call tonight. We recognize the impact of short-term rental housing in our bigger centers, but also our smaller communities as well.
Thank you. Bernadette, you wanted to speak to this issue? Bernadette, would you like to speak to this issue?
No, I had another question.
Oh, okay.
I just wanted to make a comment, but I'll let someone else answer that question.
Sure. Nope. Okay. Well, why don't you pose the question that you?
I just want to. You were mentioning people to go to the chat. Just for those that may not go onto Zooms too many, there's a lot in the chat. A lot of great information. There's the 3 dots that they can open up, and they can save the chat to look at it later. So if anyone doesn't know that, if you open up the chat, there's a little thing that says a file, and if you click on those 3 dots, it says the save to chat, and then you can save it and you can print it out later, and you can you can read it later. So you don't have to try to keep scrambling and writing stuff down. So just
Thanks
a
for
little
that.
tidbit. You're welcome.
That's amazing. I had no idea. I've been on Zoom so many times and I had no idea you could save the chat. That's fantastic. Thank you for that. So the next question, so we did talk about cooperative models. There's a comment about zoning. It's more of a comment. Just past these. So another question via email from Stephanie. Toronto recently approved all new builds have to have one unit available as low income accessible housing. Is this feasible in Nova Scotia? And is one unit enough? That's a good question. Christine or Catherine, want to take first stab at that? And if not, I saw a big no from Sherry.
Maybe I should let Sherry answer first then.
Do you want to take a stab at that, Sherry?
I was just going to say, I don't think one is enough, because I feel that, you know, depending on the socioeconomic background of the people in the building, that person might feel isolated or, you know, less than. I just think it might be more community building to have, you know, 3, 4, 5 units, ideally.
Mm-hmm.
So in our report, yeah, we're absolutely asking to an amendment to the Halifax Charter and the MGA so that there's inclusionary zoning required. And so we request 4 units, I think, in each development be dedicated to affordable housing. And I think it's very possible in Nova Scotia. In fact, if there's anything that comes out of the Housing Commission's work, I think that's going to be a recommendation, because it's, you know, working with the market, with the market, with for-profit providers to provide a small amount of affordable housing. So I think that that's one thing that we're actually going to see.
Great. Thanks for that. And you know, like that conversation also reminds me of Alex's points from earlier about making sure to stress how market solutions really aren't the way out of this sort of thing. It reminds me of a housing situation in Vancouver a number of years ago, where in order to get around it in the market way, they created 2 separate entrances into a building, one for people who were part of social housing and one for market people, which is probably one of the most disgusting things that I've ever heard of, you know, in a developed country. So we cannot trust markets alone, I think, to do this kind of work. The next question we have, also via email, is a question about whether there's a petition list that we could start to show the huge amount of interest in this sort of thing. And I see that almost more as perhaps like a suggestion, a call out to maybe start like a change.org and to think about the framing of that. Christine or Catherine, did you want to speak to that?
I'll let Christine answer that.
I also saw that it's Mark, right? Mark, call again. No, we need your help, Mark. We haven't planned a campaign. You know, as a think tank, we do what we can on the communication side, but we rely on all of the fantastic advocates in the community to support developing ideas like petitions and other ways to develop a campaign. But I'm thinking, wait, Alec is developing a campaign. I forgot. Go, Alec.
Thank you. I put my hand up just to say that, yes, there is a campaign forthcoming. We're just waiting on the commission's report to finalize the campaign and finalize our messages. But yes, the Nova Scotia Action Coalition for Community Wellbeing, which is an anti-poverty coalition, will be launching a campaign within the next week, maybe 2 weeks, to get a petition started, to get some form letters going to MLAs, to get the report action, and to build a broad list and base of support to continue to push for these issues. So look for that. And the idea, again, is to continue this narrative, to continue to build our base of support, and to not let government off the hook. So thanks.
Thank you for that. So the next question, we've got time for a couple more questions, so I'll keep taking them here. And the next question is from Bethana that says, I wonder if food security, such as community gardens, could be part of a vision of affordable housing. Great question.
Yes, absolutely. And, so part of this is, well, I'm sorry, it doesn't speak to community gardens exactly, but as far as enhancing food security, definitely, again, thinking about locating affordable housing in places that make sense for people as far as accessing amenities and services. We write about the community land trust model in the report as well. And, one of the interesting features of community land trusts is that they often incorporate other initiatives. So they might rent space out to a community center, or they might incorporate something like a community garden. So yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for that. Okay. I think that's all the specific questions in there. I see something just came in from Peggy. And maybe we'll give the last question here before we conclude. Toronto has a requirement that if affordable units are demolished, they have to be replaced in the new build. Halifax is losing thousands of affordable housing units through redevelopment with nothing in return. Is that something that's addressed, or something, or an area that shows up some promise to work on?
We don't address this issue in the report, so that's a really great question. I think we address the loss of existing affordable units in another way, and that's the right of first purchase. So if you have affordable units that are going on the market, the province has the first opportunity to purchase those and either manage the housing themselves or turn that housing over to a nonprofit association or a tenants cooperative, mechanisms like that. But no, we don't have anything in the report that addresses demolishing existing stock.
Great, thank you. Christine, did you have anything to say on that before we move to our conclusion?
Just that we do have, I think, a recommendation around, I think that probably doesn't address the demolishing part, but around if a landlord is doing substantive renovations and requires tenants to vacate, that they have first right to the property. And given that our rent control language would apply to vacant apartments and current apartments, like you're looking at a landlord that's not going to be able to just evict somebody, say that they're going to renovate and then not have that tenant who was there have a right to go back. Now, reality is, of course, that's very disruptive in people's lives, and probably the end is that people will be moving, but it is a signal, just like some of the other recommendations in there, which is really about ensuring that people have some security in their housing and that we're not going to see the same kind of renovictions that we've seen.
Thank you for that. And with that, we're going to move just to our conclusion and kind of final thanks here. Thank you, everyone, for this seriously engaged and thoughtful and scaffolded conversation where everybody was so clearly used to working with one another and building on questions. This is a very engaged group of people, dedicated and passionate, all of you in the audience, as well as all of you who've been involved. So we would like to thank all our speakers for this evening. I'd like to acknowledge, as we've been talking about, that the report is a result of a collaborative effort. And I think you see that very clearly in this conversation. All those named came to a consensus on the recommendations in the document. And there were others who contributed writing and research assistants who we would also like to take a moment to thank. And these people include Claire Horn, Sydney Belford, Andy Crosby, Aijia Deng, Sarah Buhler, and Laura Sims. We are also very appreciative of the invaluable writing, research, and guidance by Dr. Catherine Levitin-Reed as the lead academic on the report. Christine Saulnier's leadership was also critical to the work, including to facilitate the working group's input. We want to thank Emily Davidson at All Caps Design for their layout and design work. It really was a beautiful report to hold and to read. I even printed it with apologies to the environmentalists. I just really, I liked it, and I'll continue to use it. We acknowledge the funding support from the following organization, including ADSUM for Women and Children, Phoenix Youth Program, Shelter Nova Scotia, and the Nova Scotia College of Social Workers. Finally, we want to acknowledge and thank all those who shared of their knowledge, experience, and time, and who engaged in respectful and productive discussions and decision-making. There is no excuse for a society as overdeveloped as ours to systematically fail to provide something as fundamental and essential as housing for all of its people. So thank you for all of your ongoing work to ensure that Nova Scotians are supported to live and thrive in the communities of their choosing. And lastly, we encourage all of you to join the CCPA Nova Scotia newsletter to stay up to date with our reports and events. The link will be added to the chat. And also, if you're in a position to support the CCPA Nova Scotia financially, please do consider donating to the Nova Scotia Research Fund. This is where a lot of our operating funds for the projects that serve the local community happen. So thank you everyone for your kind attention. We will be finishing at exactly on time, which is remarkable. And again, testimony to you that we've had over 20 speakers and such conversation happen in 2 hours. This would never happen in the university where I spend a lot of my time. So thank you everyone. Have a good evening. This struggle continues first thing in the morning.
Night, everyone. Good night, everyone. Well done.
Good night. Thanks
Good night.
all.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Good night, thanks.
Bye.
Well done.
Andy, put on your camera for a minute. Hello.
Hello.
So nice to meet you sort of in person, your real body. Thanks for your support on the report. I think it's wild that you and Ajay know each other.
We